Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis in the portal. You're not in the portal, are you, Landis? You're not going anywhere.
Not in the portal, no. I considered it, but I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. If you went in the portal, that would be the first ever portal murder, where it was like, somebody went in the portal, but then his existing team murdered him, so he can't go in the portal. We are going to talk about the portal, and we have a bunch of numbers. I've been dancing around this. I spent my entire Saturday doing this, Bill, and I finally did it. And it's our little version of how our 28 Northern teams strategize the portal, go about reshaping their roster or not reshaping their roster. And what we want to do is use what happened in 2024 to inform us about what is happening in 2025. Much of that has already happened in the December window. We are currently in the midst of the spring portal window. And so we don't just want to talk about what's going on because there's somebody new every 5 minutes that goes in and you can't keep up with that. But we want to get a feel here, Bill, because the range of portal strategies that were employed by our Northern teams last year, which I do think are indicative of how coaches and GMs for some of these schools want to go about it, also maybe is one-offs that we need to identify, but also people coming around more slowly to the realities. It's remarkable, Bill, how different it can be from one program to the next. The metric that we use often here is top 30 players in the number of snaps that they played for your team. So this is the top 30. What I did, all 28 teams for us, I did a couple Southern teams too. I went through how many of your top 30 players in number of snaps came to you at high school, how many were new transfers last season, and how many were previous transfers. And Bill, it is so vast, the difference from teams in one end to teams at the other.
It is kind of surprising, actually. I'm looking forward to going through that data with you. I don't know that I still have a firm opinion, I guess, on even how it should be. I guess the universal truth is this, right? Like, you need to be in the portal. Like, in some regard, you have to be using it to build your roster. And I think all of our teams do embrace that idea. But it is pretty remarkable, like how the plans vary. And I don't know if you've come around to what you think is the right plan or not. I sometimes I feel like I have it, and then other times I like look across the sport and think like, oh, maybe I'm off base on that. So I'm looking forward in this episode to like diving into some of that, and maybe there'll be some clarity on what's right and what's like not quite right when trying to build through the portal.
So at the end of the show, we are going to dabble. We're going to dip into some of the big portal moves that are currently happening in the North. Trevor Pena, the Syracuse receiver, has a visit scheduled for Penn State this week. Among other things, there's a pretty good Florida State receiver who's visiting Pitt today as we record on Monday. Steve Angeli, the Notre Dame quarterback, has a very interesting Northern visit lined up. We know that CJ Carr, Kenny Minchie, they're going to be the quarterback at Notre Dame. Steve Angeli, the veteran, who led an important drive in the semifinal last year against Penn State when Riley Leonard was hurt. He has the ability to be a starting quarterback. There's a Northern team that might be looking at him. So we will delve into that. And we do have a visit with Max Olson from ESPN.com. He's one of the best transfer portal reporters out there, Bill. And he helped us get a lay of the land of why this happens, what's a trend, what's a one-off, who's good at it. Some big picture stuff with Max that we'll hit in the middle of the show.
Yeah, it's good to have people on like Max who, talk to GMs and stuff like that. You and I are just two guys who flip on the microphones and opine about the sport. Max actually talks to people who are in the nitty gritty of doing this. So it's always nice to have somebody like that on.
I'll put up my personal cell phone right now, and any GM is invited to call me. I'll put it up right now. Call me. I want us to come to a few conclusions about, I think there are three strategies that you see that teams employ in the portal. We'll get to those at the end and discuss like which of our Northern teams we think employs these different strategies and what are the best ones. But we are going to start off with the idea of how to win the portal, right? How to win the portal. And we're going to go through like who's not in there enough, maybe who's in there too much. And then also I have, and I double checked the math all day Saturday, NBA basketball on in the background, spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet. PFF, number of snaps, the 30 guys who played the most last year. And then I went through every single guy and where did they come from? And I did think, by the way, I include, if you came from a junior college, I include you as a high school recruit. Because to me, that is still, there's like, You're digging somebody out. It is not an established, you've been at the Power 4 level. So, and I wasn't going to make a junior college column. Is that okay? Jake Retzlaff, is that okay with you? BYU quarterback.
That's okay with me. Yeah, I'll allow it this time.
28 times 30. Let me see this real quick. I'm going to do math. Let's do math on the show. All you show-offs out there, 28 times 30. Did you just do it in your head? I didn't. Did you know there's an app on your computer that has a calculator? You know that, right? Very helpful.
Yeah, there's one on your phone too. Yeah.
Oh, shoot. 840 players I went through. 172 of them, of the 840 players who played the most snaps for our Northern teams, were new portal guys last year. So now we're going to divide. Where's the divide button? Oh, no, because sometimes the divide button's a slash and sometimes it's the line with the little 2 dots. Oh, John's showing off. 840. Yeah, don't show off, John. We know what's going on. 840 divided by, I never know which number is supposed to be the numerator and which is supposed to be the denominator. So then I just do it both ways until I get the answer that makes sense. 20%. 20% of the Northern players who played the most last year came out of the portal last season. Does that sound about right to you? 20%.
That's lower than I would have guessed.
So now some of this is not, because, and I think one of the things that we want to guide this audience through is there's the explosion, and I got exploded on in the process of the research here, and I was like, oh man, check out this team. And then I double checked what they actually did, and I was like, no, I got exploded on in the portal. That's not actually anything that matters, because you can see headlines. There's a lot of headlines and a lot of reports about every single guy. And then you dig in on stuff and it's like, he played 27 snaps last year and was definitely not going to play for the team he was at this year either. But at the new school, it's like, oh, I can't believe they got that guy. And so these are the guys that actually mattered, Landis. And that's the thing. So 20% mattered. 20% played. But right now, it feels like, well, I don't know, 60% of everyone's roster must be new portal guys. And that's not
feels like
the reality.
Whole sport. It feels like the whole sport's in the portal. Like if you have, I have like Twitter notifications turned on for people like Max Olson and Pete Nico set on 3, because I don't want to miss when the big ones happen. But if you just look at your phone all day, you're like, did everyone in college football go into the transfer portal today? And the answer to that is no, but it definitely feels like it. So I think it's nice to have that 20% number. But even then, it's still like, I would have guessed probably, I don't know, closer to 50, maybe like 35% of our most important players came via the portal. So I'm still pretty surprised by the 20.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just, we don't want to act like it's not important, but we also, I just think we want to be aware of that. It's not the end all be all. And by the way, I'll give away my answer now. My answer for like what you should be doing is you should be somewhere in the middle, right? Like that's my answer, that you shouldn't be doing nothing in the portal, but you shouldn't be trying to rebuild your entire team every offseason in the portal. Are you blown away that's the answer I'm going to get to at the end of the show?
Your answer is squarely in the middle. No, I think that's probably right. But there's some program specificity in there too. It's like, can you live in the middle if you're, like a bottom feeder kind of program? If your program doesn't recruit at a moderately high level out of high school, can you actually live in the middle? I think is a worthwhile question.
Yeah. I mean, because it's nice to aspire to that, yes, that you are aspiring to the middle, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is possible for your program. Right. So, okay. Let's start with the teams that don't do it much. And these are teams who probably are not doing enough in the portal. And you looked at the rankings right now and like how many teams have fewer than 10 transfers so far this offseason. And there's only 7 of our teams that have fewer than 10 transfers. Notre Dame and Syracuse each have 8, Iowa State and BYU 7, Ohio State, Penn State, and Iowa 6. So within that group, there are a couple teams that are very specific in their targets, and there are a couple teams that just don't do that much, because when you look at the teams that were heavy on getting guys out of high school with their top 30 guys last year, there are some teams that really stand out there in a way that they're good. These programs are good, but I think it is interesting that it is open for them to be even better if they hit the portal a little more. So, Mike, let's bring up that graphic of the teams that really leaned on the high school guys. Last year, Iowa State had the best year in program history. 27 of their top 30 guys were high school recruits. That's pretty wild. Utah and Iowa and Northwestern, 26 of their top 30 guys came out of high school, and Rutgers, 25. And what I would say to this list, Landis, is that is a lot of old school coaches. Matt Campbell, Kyle Whittingham, Kirk Ferentz, Greg Schiano. And then Northwestern, I just think, is in a tough spot with, they're getting a lot of their cream thinned off the top, and I think they are having trouble filling in behind that. Northwestern might be one of the teams hurt most by the portal, but otherwise, I think this is philosophical, and I'm curious to see how this philosophy might shift.
I think it's definitely philosophical, but I think even, well, we're going to get into some of the numbers. Like, I think it is shifting for some of these teams already. Because I don't think this is maybe like the last remnants of being able to do it the old way. Like, I don't know that any of these teams will ever have a number this high again, frankly, because it's just going to be hard, I think, for these programs, these kind of programs in particular, to recruit what they need to recruit out of high school and then like keep those guys around long enough for them to develop into starters. Because these are all developmental programs too. These are all programs that take a lot of 3-star high school kids and, you know, have them in their program for 3 years, sometimes 4 years before they're able to become starters too. And that's going to be a tougher and tougher way to live, I think. We'll see. Well, I think things will settle in a little bit. I believe, especially once we get the rev share stuff, and maybe I'm naive to think it will settle in, but I think it could. So, but there is a common thread between all these teams for sure, and I'm not so certain how long that common thread is going to last, because I do think maybe this is like the last of a dying breed kind of situation with these couple of teams.
So there are a couple things that happened here in the research that is going to affect how I view this college football season. And Utah is one of them, because it feels like Utah is changing already. And that they just did not have, they had Dorian Singer, right? The USC receiver who was one of their portal guys last year. But they are much more,
I mean, Cam Rising's a transfer, right? He didn't start his career at Utah.
Yeah, but he wasn't one of their top 30 guys because he didn't play enough. But they got Wayshawn Parker at running back. They got Devin Dampier at quarterback. They have completely redone their receiver room, and they are reportedly in the mix for a Texas A&M guy who is in the portal and could be a very interesting addition for them. They got Lance Holtzclaw at edge, who's going to probably be an impact guy for them. What is happening here, Bill, with Utah is I am looking at what they did before, and yes, they lost some good players, but I am seeing the way they are getting after it in the portal this year. And to me, it is not a reshaping of the roster necessarily, because I think there's still a foundation there for Utah, even though last year was so bad. Philosophical shift might be wrong, but Kyle Whittingham at the conclusion of spring practice was running through with the reporters there 4 areas where they're still looking for portal guys. He's acknowledging this. He's acknowledging like the continued roster building. And I think when you have a program like Utah that has so much going for it for the past 2 decades plus with Kyle Whittingham, I am super intrigued by what seems to be a real embrace of the portal right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do wonder, because we're talking a decent amount about the offensive side, right? And they brought in the new OC and the offensive style change. So is it just trying to find some guys who better fit that offensive style, and then they'll start recruiting to it more out of high school? I'm not sure. I am much more leaning toward they're gonna try to reshape the roster a little more via the portal than they have in the past. And I think it's probably more enticing too in a league like the Big 12, where it does seem like teams can kind of like jump up rather easily in that conference. So maybe because of that, you might be a little more willing to rebuild through the portal. So It could just be a one-off, but I don't think it is. I think this is a new way of doing business for Utah, and maybe, if you call Kyle Whittingham an honest moment, he might express some regret of not doing it sooner. I think a lot of these older school coaches aren't entirely sure what to make of roster building in 2025, but you sort of have to adapt or die. And I guess that the Kyle Whittingham, who's clearly on his way out because he's announced he will retire soon and has a coach in waiting, doesn't want to be the kind of coach that goes out with a whimper because he refused to embrace the transfer portal. So if this is the way that he's choosing to put the ending chapter on his career, we'll see if it works. But I almost applaud him for being willing to kind of adapt with the times and change a little bit.
Yeah. I'm curious to see what Iowa does, because all Iowa has done really lately is they got Jacob Gill, the receiver from Northwestern, in the portal last year, and they got Brendan Sullivan, the quarterback from Northwestern. But it's all been focused on their shortcomings in the passing game. And they added Bryce George, who is a Division II All-American from Ferris State on the offensive line. And to add a guy like that, they're good on the offensive line, but for them to still be aggressive with a rise up kind of guy on the offensive line makes me think, okay, maybe they're looking into this a little bit more. Plus they got a Chattanooga receiver who's had 3 straight 600-yard seasons. And again, it's just little things. Iowa, I don't think where it's on the verge of being a reshape your roster kind of program, but it feels like to me they're being aware of, we need to get after this a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same deal, I think, as Utah. You just have to, we're talking a little bit about it with Max Olson. You can't be a program which is no, that's not for us. If that's your approach when you're trying to put your roster together, you will fall behind and you will not be able to recover. So I understand that, it's crazy and maybe people aren't comfortable with the money and players have a lot of agency. And I'm not saying that all of it necessarily is good, but it's the world that we live in now. So if you're wanting to be a winning college football program, I think you have to be willing to dabble in this a little more. And I think even some of our programs that haven't been so eager to do that in the past are kind of changing their tune now.
All right, so we have a couple more teams that we want to talk about. Is maybe are they not doing it enough? There's a couple teams, maybe are they doing it too much? We want to dive into some of the positional stuff, but let's go to Max Olson now. He really knows this portal, Bill, about as well as anybody. The strategy behind it, how different teams work it. Max Olson of ESPN.com joining us here on Kings of the North. Back on Kings of the North, joined by Max Olson, your friend and mine, from ESPN and ESPN.com. Max, thanks for joining us here on Kings of the North.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me on.
You are going to educate us about the transfer portal window, and Landis, you have ways to get us educated.
I think so. Yeah, there's nobody better than Max to ask about this. Here's the thing, Max. I don't know what to make of the spring portal window. I feel like it looms there as we go through spring practice as the thing that's going to sort of blow up all of our, I don't know, all the thoughts we're developing about the season over the course of spring football, and the spring portals just there well, all these guys are going to leave. What's it matter? We had PJ Fleck on the show last week, and I was trying to give him a compliment for all the guys they've done a good job of keeping, and he said, well, we have a second window to get through first. So it's it just sort of lingers there as this boogeyman, and it's always sort of characterized as a thing that's going to be wild and crazy and just wait until all these rosters get destroyed. Is it that? We see a lot of names, but does the spring portal window actually shake up the sport as much as people maybe might think it does, or at the very least, as much as the winter transfer portal window does?
No, I think generally speaking, historically, I would say no. I went back into the study from last year's spring portal cycle, and I think of the hundreds and hundreds of players who made moves, I think 12 of them became all conference players last season. I think another 12 maybe earned honorable mention recognition for all conference stuff last year. So it's not there are some high impact players that make moves, not really quarterbacks. That's why I think the Nico thing is so startling, I think, to a lot of people, is because you just don't see QB1s make moves post spring. It doesn't make a lot of sense in a lot of ways. But I think in terms of this, I think in this window, it's a little bit of a different proposition too, because as you guys know, with revenue sharing imminent, assuming the House settlement gets approved, which I think we should all probably pray for that just to have some order to this. People have been these teams have been spending and investing a lot of money in their roster and their retention for 2025, and those conversations started in November, December. And yeah, there's probably some players that will come to the table here after the spring and say, hey, I need a little bit more money to stay. But overall, these teams have spent so much time and effort and money on retaining the roster for next year that I think that the programs that are like top 25 programs, I don't think you're as worried this time that guys are going to leave because they've been taken care of. Now, if you're sort of a middle class program, you're going to have to fight to hold on to your best players. But I think for those contenders that are just looking to add a couple more players, I don't think you're that worried that you're going to lose guys you don't want to lose at this time of year.
Is this the right calendar, by the way? I mean, we could have this conversation 1,000 times, but this December window that was December 9th to the 28th this season, and now April 16th through the 25th now. If Max Olson was in charge of college football, is this how you would do the portal?
No, I mean, of course not. No, I think it's funny. I talked to a GM a couple of weeks ago who threw out like an interesting idea, and this is not one that's like gained traction, but I think the proposal from AFCA from the coaches is let's just do the portal in January, tight window in January. And I think part of that is they were reacting to the Bo Prabula and some of the players that left playoff teams because they had to go on to their next team. You want to prevent that. You want these teams to be able to finish up their seasons. And I think that's maybe a proposal that like, okay, well, we can at least talk about this one. It's not as controversial as what we currently have. But like I talked to one GM who's like, why don't we just do this stuff in February? Like, can we just let these guys get on campus? I mean, obviously we have to rethink the whole calendar and the whole spring schedule and the whole summer schedule in terms of like figuring out what actually makes sense for the future. But it's like, what if we just did this like in February where guys are out of school and yeah, maybe they're pulling out and they're going to go explore, but they have time to go take visits and figure out where they want to be for next year. It's not this pressurized thing that we have in December where guys are bailing on their team before the postseason, where guys are not like, we're not doing two windows where guys are maybe like going to still change their mind at the end of April. Like there's got to be some solution to this that has one window, but I don't think it's just, let's just fix this one thing and then everything's fine. I think it's part of like the larger conversation of we have to blow up the whole calendar and start from scratch.
Yeah, so stupid academics get in the way of everything. Oh, our semester started and everyone has to go to class. Stupid class, right. Stupid college learning. Hey, Nico, you said his name, Nico Iamaleava. Trend-setting guy who is showing us what the future of this sport is going to be, with dudes, QB1s in spring football being like, I'm out, or one-off. Weird situation, maybe some miscommunication, and that happened, but it's not necessarily a sign of things to come.
Don't think it's a sign of things to come. Yeah, I think this was the one-off. I think this was a pretty unique situation. And, in talking, we'll have more reporting on this week on ESPN, but like it's talking to the people on this. I think that this has been a thing that has been going on throughout the offseason where, the Tennessee side says they're asking for more money. Nico's side says we were asking for them to get a better offensive line, get better receivers, like really improve the supporting cast for this year. I think part of this just goes back to the original pact that they made, where if you're giving $8 million to a high school junior, you are signing up for a little bit of a different experience over his time at your college. And obviously at the time that deal was not permissible and they had to fight the NCAA and all that stuff. And so I think this all started with money, with a lot of money and with a lot of, with making a deal with this group. And I think over time that relationship broke down, the trust broke down, certainly to the point where when the On3 report came out, then I think both sides were just like, we cannot move forward with this. We cannot repair this. And so Nico's going to UCLA. This was not from his camp standpoint. They did not maximize their leverage by making this move at this time. As you saw, other schools did not step in and say, here's $4 million. And so UCLA was his best option. And in a lot of ways, maybe his only option to be like a bona fide Power 4 starter. And that's crazy to say, because a couple weeks ago, we were talking about him as a top 10 quarterback in college football coming back for 25. But I think the timing of this was not great for Nico, and the timing of this is not great for Tennessee. Like, Tennessee has to go find a starting quarterback here over the next week before the portal closes, and it's going to be expensive. And will that player come in this summer and gel with everybody and help them be a playoff team again? Like, really remains to be seen. I don't think this was in the best interest of either side, but certainly it's a divorce that became irrevocable, or excuse me, irreparable by the end of it.
Landis, ask him before you go. Ask
I know.
Landis,
I'm going to ask him.
Do it to him that you did to me.
I'm going to ask him. Max, I made Doug. I got Doug angry. I made him scared. He got swords out. He was being all defensive last week when I just sort of posited, like, what if Tennessee comes sniffing around Avery Johnson, Jalen Daniels, or Rocco Bichs? Would you like to calm Doug down and tell him whether or not either of those three Northern quarterbacks will be a possibility for Tennessee?
I think Tennessee has fished around and talked to probably all the notable quarterbacks in the North over the past week. I truly do. I don't think Rocco Becht is going to leave Iowa State. I've talked to people at Kansas State who've been assured Avery Johnson is not leaving. I think Jalen Daniels, for the unique career he's had at Kansas, I don't think it makes a lot of sense for him to make a change. But they're going to keep it. I mean, obviously, Josh Hoover was able to get a raise at TCU out of this situation. I think Luke Altmaier at Illinois is one that probably Tennessee has fished around on. Like, I mean, you name them. I would imagine that inquiries have been made to these guys' agents just to say, hey, what's he making now? Would he be willing to consider this if we're able to pay him more?
Is that all right, Doug? You feel okay about that?
I feel better. I do feel better. I don't care what Josh Hoover does, but the other ones I feel better about. Thank you, Max. I feel better.
Okay. Max, as you're talking to these GMs and people at these programs over, a couple of portal windows now, I'm wondering if, as it pertains to certain positions, like, have people learned enough now going through this portal process for a couple of years to know if you need a guy at X or Y position, you can probably find him? And are there still positions where there's a scarcity, where either those recruitments become incredibly competitive, or teams start really reaching for guys because you think a quality of player might be there at a certain position, but it's just not?
Yeah, and it's interesting it's a great question, and it's interesting how timing plays into that too, because I think when I talked to GMs the past few months who say, like, if you wanted to get like a starting tackle's always scarce, right? There's always a scarcity of tackle, of legit pass rushers, of legit defensive tackles, of the big guys up front that you need. But like it depends on timing a little bit and how you approach this, because there are some like if you went into the portal at the start of December and went out and got a tackle from a group of 5 or lower power 4, like you could get one for maybe like $400,000 or $500,000 at the beginning of January. Those offensive linemen that, like, the guys that left Notre Dame and some of the guys that left Ohio State, some of those guys that went in the portal, some who were experienced, some who were not experienced, those guys were like $1 million to even have a conversation with them. So part of it is just like, can you get ahead of this, or are you going to be at the end of this where you still have a need, there's not that many guys left, and they kind of named their price. And so I think in the spring window, a little bit different, because fewer guys are going to go in. And so the few that do, like you saw Joe Cotton at South Dakota, who's going to Cincinnati. Bryce George is from Ferris State, D2 Ferris State, going to Iowa. Markel Samuel, the tackle from App State, Oklahoma State. Those guys are going to get great offers. But part of it is just like, if you wait a little bit too long on these, you can end up paying a price for a guy that is inarguably overpaid.
Bill, ask him about Joe Cotton since he brought him up.
Yeah, so it's less about, Max, like what Cotton will do for Cincinnati, but just like the way you wrote it on your piece on ESPN, and you have him as the 5th ranked transfer in the spring portal window. Like the splash that Cincinnati was able to make there by getting Joe Cotton from South Dakota, how did they position themselves to do that? Because you look at some of the other teams that were in the mix there, I don't know that you would assume like, oh yeah, Cincinnati's going to be the one that actually gets that done. How did the Bearcats pull that one off?
Yep, part of it's a credit to Jack Griffith and the folks in Cincinnati's front office there. Part of this is just like, you got to be ahead of the game on the pre-portal process, and that is being able to evaluate the guys who are out there who are returning for 2025, being able to assess, like, can this guy play here, and then trying to kind of be first in line when these guys actually do go in the portal. And that's part of that's just conversations with agents, and part of that is, and really making the sell to the people around them of like, hey, this is going to be a great fit for them. This is exactly what we need. In some of those cases, you're going to have to make a strong offer to shut down the recruitment. But yeah, certainly Joe Cotton, if he takes 5 official visits, he's going to go see Wisconsin and Michigan and a bunch of Power 4 contenders, I imagine. And so it's a credit to the folks in Cincinnati who identify him, because that's still part of this. When you're looking at Group of 5 and you're looking at FCS, you have to be able to identify talent, evaluate them, and figure out how to like get in the mix there before everybody else does. Because by the time these guys hit the portal, you don't have time to spend a day evaluating and talking with your offensive line coach and talking with your coordinator and talking with your head coach about should we offer him or not. Like, you got to be ahead of the game here a little bit. And so it's a credit to Cincinnati. That's a great pickup there as a multi-year starter at left tackle who will help protect Brendan Sorsby.
So, Max, as you have observed a couple years of this and talked to people around the sport, are there any particular teams out there that you think really have a handle on this portal thing now, that really have a good strategy, that really have a good attack plan, maybe are ahead of the game with positioning themselves to get guys, but also with knowing what they need? Because we've been talking about on the show, like, we only look at the northern teams, but there are teams that barely do anything in the portal, and there are teams that completely reshape their entire roster in the offseason in the portal. Who do you think is doing a great job?
If you'd asked me this last summer, I probably would have said Florida State's like better than everybody at this stuff, right? And that's the tough thing, right? I mean, I'm not making fun of them. Like, I think truly what they built in 2023, it's like, okay, this is like the peak of like really flipping your program by finding the right transfers and not just overpaid guys from Power 4 rosters, but like great evaluation. And so that kind of shows the challenge of this is like, can you do it every year? And that's a tough thing. Certainly you saw the one-hit wonder at Michigan State. You've seen Colorado go all in on transfers, and obviously it worked out in year 2. I think it's really hard to do this year in and year out and be consistent. I think from that standpoint, Ole Miss is probably at the top of the list nowadays, and just in terms of the players they've taken. And this year's portal class is not as sexy as the ones they've taken in the past. Last year, obviously, they loaded up to try to chase the national championship. I think Ole Miss does a great job in terms of we are just constantly looking at the portal. We are constantly trying to upgrade this depth chart, and we're going to develop high school players, but we're going to invest a lot of money in the portal. And I think they've done a really nice job of that. I think there's just different ways to do this. I think the one that really stands out to me is Arizona State. And what Arizona State did is not, we just got all these studs. In fact, Arizona State had a multi-year plan to how they approached this when they got there. And the guys that they took in year 1 were guys like Cam Scadaboo, who were going to have multiple seasons in their program and have a chance to develop and get better. And they struck gold with Sam Levitt from Michigan State. But I think what the run that they pulled off last year is truly a credit to evaluation from day 1 from Kenny Dillingham and his staff, and finding guys that were going to have 2 or 3 years in your program that they could actually develop. And so I think that's one way to do it. You can still be a developmental program and still be heavy on portal and still try to flip your roster as fast as possible. And I think as we see success stories like that, any coach that's in year 1 or year 2 is looking at it and saying like, hey, this is easier than ever to run off all the players I inherited and replace them with all new guys and bet on ourselves up that we can find the right collection of talent. But I think when you see these success stories, other people are definitely going to try to replicate it.
And you look at Ole Miss's playoff run last year, and you just see the way that all came together for Lane Kiffin down there. They just they nailed it, man. They nailed it.
No nuts.
You put it on a tee for him. All right, so we talked about Nico, Max. I thought the David Stone thing at Oklahoma was like kind of weird. So there has been a little bit of strangeness to this portal window. I don't mean to say that it is entirely unimportant with the question I asked you to start this off. But as we have a few more days of this, what do you remain intrigued by in terms of like potential splashes, like shoes still left to drop, just guys that are on your mind who have yet to find homes? Like, how's this thing going to close out, and where do you think the biggest moves might be made?
Yeah, by the way, David Stone's an interesting one. I think there's a case there where he went in the portal Friday night, which surprised people at Oklahoma. And the spin you saw right away was, well, he's being overpaid as a 5-star recruit and didn't produce anything last year. And this is just how it is, right? I mean, we got to manage the cap now. We can't overspend on these guys who don't produce, who aren't playing, who's our number 4 D tackle. Sometimes you got to let these guys go. And then of course the coaching staff spent 48 hours convincing him to stay, and he's coming back, and fans had to delete a lot of mean tweets about it because that can happen still. Guys can still come back. But it shows some of the tension of this stuff now, because in this offseason, people are overspending because they have all the remaining collective money, and then they are having money starting in July, anticipating that they're going to have 15 million or 10 to 15 million for their roster through rev share starting in July. And so you've got it's a very inflated market right now. A year from now, we're going to see like can we figure out a way to circumvent this stuff, and real NIL, or guys across the country going to be taking pay cuts. But I think in terms of finishing out the cycle, I think the top player available now in our rankings is Bo Atkinson, the pass rusher from North Carolina. And that's one that Ohio State's in the mix on. Georgia's in the mix. I think a lot of SEC schools are going to try to fight for him. And he's a really talented player, led the Tar Heels in sacks last season. But one of those players, as you go through a coaching transition, I certainly don't think Bill Belichick and his staff wanted to lose him. But as you move to a 3-4, he's not quite what you're looking for on the edge there for their defense. So maybe not a fit for that coaching staff as they take over, but certainly a guy that's a fit for a lot of coaching staffs, especially who went into the spring period trying to add talent on the edge. Ohio State, Georgia, certainly two teams that were hoping to get that talent. I think another one, Keelan Marion, the wide receiver leaving BYU. He was an All-American last season as a kick returner. Certainly he's already got a ton of offers and big time Power 4 offers, and I think he's quickly becoming one of the most coveted guys out there in the portal.
Yeah, Keelan Marion was not good. There was a couple guys like I was like, hey, watch this guy in the spring, and then I watched him get in the portal and leave the North. Do you think there's any chance that Bill Belichick's girlfriend could send an email and maybe get Bo Atkinson to stay, though? Do we have to factor that in?
I don't know where talent retention falls in her line of duties in North Carolina. It's a great question. Yeah. And I think that I just think that I think North Carolina's had 16 players, scholarship players leave the program this month. It's what you'd expect, right, for year one, but especially a guy coming from the NFL. It's like, yes, I inherited you from Mac Brown. Yes, this program wasn't terrible before me, but I do not need a lot of you guys. We're going to go make this look like our type of team here for year one.
I don't know if his luggage is Gucci. I feel like maybe Bill Belichick's luggage is from like Kohl's or something, but I'm bringing my luggage and I got it on the Kohl's clearance rack. I mean, could also be a thing that might get guys to clear out of the room. You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
Max Olson, where can people find you if they think, my gosh, this guy, he's so smart. He's so handsome. He's so attuned to what's going on. Where can they get more information from you?
You can follow me on Twitter, Max_Olson. You can read my work at ESPN.com, and follow along, because I think there's going to be a lot more craziness that happens here in the next 5 days before the portal window closes. And I think chaos is a little bit exciting. It's a little bit scary for most fan bases, but it's a little bit exciting here in the next few days.
Yeah. All right, Max Olson from ESPN. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Back on Kings of the North. Thanks to Max Olson for that. I think we're having a couple technical problems here, Landis, that are affecting our normal high standards here. So we apologize to anybody who is seeing that and hanging with us through this. But I do think that Max was pretty interesting there in
trying to figure out what land is, which is we understand what's happening in the portal. Nobody likes it. We're not sure what the answers are, but also we didn't necessarily aren't waiting for every Nico Iamaleava situation to blow college football up.
It's funny to me, like everything that happens in the portal, like all these like earth-shattering things come across in the portal that are supposed to upend the sport, but then like they come and they pass, and everyone's like, I don't think it'll be that big of a deal. So eventually like a thing will happen that I think like truly turns this thing on its head. It seems like it might have to at some point at the rate that we're going. I don't know that it's necessarily happened yet. Clearly we're doing business differently now, but it feels like, whether they like it or not anyway, like teams more or less have a handle on how to operate in this world, while every coach in America, bangs his fist on a podium somewhere to get more guardrails on what exactly this is. I do think most are kind of going with the flow and figuring out the best ways to go about it relative to your program. So it's not all the way there yet. Like, I think that's still going to have to get ironed out over the next year or so. But and then who knows what might change over that course of time as well. But I don't know. It just seems like chaos is sort of baked into the cake. But I do feel like maybe it's got some sense to it now, at least more sense than it did like 2 years ago.
And I do think we always have to be on alert. Like, when coaches complain about things, when are they complaining about reasonable things? Like, hey, we just need more structure, we need more guardrails. And when are they complaining? When are they complaining because they no longer have complete control?
Yeah, right.
And sometimes they're just upset that, hey, we lost our fourth string left guard. And back in the old days, we would have had our fourth string left guard just sitting there waiting to never play. And that's not really what this is about. But there are enough reasonable things here that I do think we still are very far from a solution. Okay, so we covered our Northern teams who probably weren't getting after it enough. So I would just tell you, I am particularly interested in Iowa State, Iowa, Utah, and Rutgers. What those coaches do the rest of this spring, but just like what their rosters look like, where we are a year from now. Because I think, again, all those programs are winning programs. What Greg Schiano has done at Rutgers, winning program. What Kyle Whittingham has done over time at Utah, winning program. Iowa and Iowa State the same. But I just think there are opportunities here, Bill, to elevate. If you can have the same type of retention, and you did some other stuff. We're not going to completely go into this now, but like, there's the in versus the out, what you're losing in the portal versus what you're bringing into the portal. And the less you lose, the less you have to go out and get in. Right. So a lot of those schools that we're talking about, they're very good at retention. But imagine if you are very good at retention and then you up your game when it comes to strategically adding to your roster here and there. I think there's real room for growth for the programs like that.
I think there definitely is. And you bring up a good point too about, and we can do this at some point, like the context always matters. You lose X number, or you bring in X number of starters. Like, how many did you actually lose? Even if for the teams that have a high number of outgoing transfers, like how many of those guys were actually important? We have this other layer of coaches assuming they have to get to 105 players on their rosters. So like that fudges up the numbers too. So there's a lot to sort through there. But I think bottom line, to your point, is if you were a coach who was only ever viewing this as a net negative, like the transfer portal, player movement, whatever, I would hope by this point you've come around to the idea, like, no, like this is weird, but we can use this, and there's a real way for us to make our roster better, even if we're not the team. Like, if you don't have to be Ole Miss, right? You don't have to generate headlines merely because you add a bunch of transfers. You can be targeted and I think like have a good plan and study it and evaluate it the very same way you do it for kids coming out of high school. In fact, it's probably easier to do it for the players coming out of the transfer portal and then find a way for it to elevate your program. And it does maybe feel like some of these programs that have been lagging behind are starting to realize that.
All right, let's talk about the teams that went crazy in the portal a year ago. And there were 5 of our teams that had more than 10 of their top 30 players who were new portal additions. Indiana, 19 of their top 30 players were new guys in the portal last year. Washington, 14, Colorado, 13, Michigan State 12, and Cincinnati 12. Now, one thing you will notice here, Indiana first-year coach, Washington first-year coach, Michigan State first-year coach, and some of the things you looked up, Bill. The Northern teams right now that have added the most transfers so far this offseason, Purdue 50, West Virginia 41. They're the 2 Northern teams with new coaches. This is how this works, right? You blow it up.
Yes. I don't know about 50.
50 is wild.
50 is a lot because 50 doesn't account for the high school kids you brought in either. Yeah. You're talking about what? I don't know, 70 of your 85 scholarship players being new people.
Yeah. But again, that's because Purdue lost 35 guys out, that practically everybody there except Devin Maccabee left, including some really excellent players. So the one thing here is you just have to be, there's a part of this that we just have to accept with new coaches and the new way of the world. The thing I want to zero in on here, though, are two things in particular. The first one is Cincinnati. And we talked about Cincinnati with Max and adding Joe Cotton, the tackle in the portal. The fact that Cincinnati had 12 new transfers in their top 30 last year, guy like Joe Royer out of Ohio State, the tight end, really helped them. But they reshaped their secondary in a way that I'm not sure really paid off. This is a little bit of a red flag for me that they it wasn't a first-year coach. Scott Satterfield was a second-year coach, but wasn't a first-year coach. And there was really a lot of movement, and they still didn't make a bowl. And so at some point, it was obviously difficult where Luke Fickell had such success there. He left. The stars of that playoff team left. We get that. But I think Cincinnati needs to settle down a little bit because I don't think they are positioned to live in the portal long term. And this number that they're one of the top 5 schools here is not a great sign to me. Do you read that in a different way?
No, I read it the same way. I do think that it is true for some programs that this number will have to be high based on a bunch of different variables. And maybe you and I have a misunderstanding of what we think Cincinnati is or should be or could be. And this number should be high for them. But I view Cincinnati where it's situated as a power conference team in a pretty good recruiting area. I don't think it should have to live and die by the portal.
Okay.
I think if you are, then I think your staff is probably doing a little something wrong. That you should be in there. You should be adding guys like Joe Cotton when you have the opportunity to. But I don't know that the majority of your important playmakers should be in the portal year over year at a place like Cincinnati. So I'm with you. This does feel like a little bit of a red flag to me, and something that would worry me when it comes to program sustainability. Because I don't think Luke Fickell would be doing this if he were the head coach there.
Agreed. Cincinnati, this research affected my view of Cincinnati a little bit. This research affected my view of Utah, and I'm suddenly potentially very encouraged by how quickly Utah could flip this after a rough year last year. And then the other team is Indiana, because the thing here with Indiana, we knew this. We are not surprised by this. 19 of their top 30 were new transfers. Do you know how many of those 19 were JMU guys? That we knew they came in a lot, but that impacted.
It was half, right?
So 10.
Yeah.
So 10 of the 19. So 10 of the 30 players for Indiana last season who took their most snaps. 1/3 of them came from Curt Cignetti's old team. My God, JMU could play ball, couldn't they? It is, and they're Mikhail Kamara and Aiden Fisher and Elijah Surratt, and there's so many good Jalen Walker. There's so many good players. It blows my mind. And here's my thing about that. Indiana is in the portal again. Roman Hemby, the running back from Maryland, Fernando Mendoza, the quarterback from Cal, couple receivers, 3 offensive linemen, including Pat Coogan from Notre Dame and Zed Mahalski from Ohio State, and Khalil Benson from Colorado coming back to Indiana after he had been in Indiana to start his career. So part of me, and we've talked about, I've said it before, I think that this is replicable. I don't think Indiana's going anywhere. And I think Curt Cignetti is going to work the portal. This affects my view of that a bit, because basically this was like the Steagles that during World War II, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Pittsburgh Steelers had to combine their team for a year, and they were the Steagles. This was the Hooks. This was the Hooser Dukes, right? And I
thought we called them the Doogers. Didn't we come across didn't we call them the Doogers last year?
Mike, we'll cut that out. We'll bring it back in 3, 2, the Doogers. The Doogers, my God, the Doogers were so good. And I think it's of course you're excited about Roman Hemby and rebuilding the offensive line and Fernando Mendoza and that kind of thing, but this was so rare. D'Angelo Pons from JMU, right? This is so rare, Bill, that I don't think Indiana's a one-off, but the idea of, hey, Curt Cignetti can magically build a team out of the portal every year just me realizing that it was 19 of 30 and 10 of the 19 were JMU guys is backing me off a little bit, because that's not going to continue, where you bring in a whole other team. You brought in the best of JMU and jammed it together with the best of what was left at Indiana and made a playoff team. And that's going to change. And what they did is just, it's such a one-off. And we've talked about it with Rich Rodriguez and trying to bring guys in from Jacksonville State. There's a couple UNLV guys who followed Barry Odom to Purdue, but nobody's ever going to do it like this. And so I am 10% down in my Indiana's going to keep doing this, because I think this was rare.
I mean, I'm certainly of the mind that it's hard to do it year after year. Like, or at least when you build your roster this way, you invite volatility.
Yeah.
Which I actually don't know that that's a bad thing for Indiana. It's like, when that worries me is like when you're a team that is, your fan base and your donors and administrators expect you to win championships regularly, and you're trying to build your roster this way. If you're a team that's like every 4 or 5 years trying to rise up and shock the world and make the playoff, I almost like this kind of roll of the dice with your roster build. But I also, I don't know that I view it that way for Indiana. We need more data, but 10 of 19 from JMU, yes, but it's also like they had 9 pretty high impact transfers from all over the place that played really well. Right? That to me tells me that they do a good job in their evaluations, right? Like Curtis Work wasn't from JMU. Trey Wettig, CJ West, Justice Ellison, like they had plenty of guys who weren't James Madison guys. I thought, I said this during the year, that I thought that staff did a nice job of targeting players who came from teams that had won, regardless of sort of what level they were at. I think that can be important. They didn't do that across the board with this current 2025 transfer class, but there's a couple in there. Like you mentioned, they got a guy from Notre Dame. They got a guy from Ohio State. So I don't know. I guess you're right that it's rare, and it's probably fair to be a little skeptical of being able to catch exactly the formula they caught last year. But I also feel like the staff probably has a pretty good handle on how to do it, because I actually don't know this. Maybe I should go look it up. Like, I bet they were building their James Madison rosters out of the transfer portal a decent amount too. And so like they're not new to this. And if anything, they're able to get better players than they were there. So I think they'll be okay. But I'm also not holding Indiana to like the same standard that I am like in Ohio State and Oregon or Penn State, where like I don't care how you build your roster, go contend for a championship. Like if Indiana has a dip because the transfer potion wasn't quite right one particular year, I think that's okay as long as they bounce back and do it right the following year.
So one area where you could be exactly right on this is, I would believe the idea that Curt Cignetti and that staff coming from JMU and having built up through lower levels of college football, they might be really good at identifying move up transfers, whether that's guys from the MAC, right? You talked about Curtis Work and CJ West, like 2 unbelievable MAC transfers. They just signed Stephen Daly from Kent State. You talk about winning programs. Kent State was 0-12 last year, but Stephen Daly as a defensive tackle, not everybody. CJ West is going to be like a top 50 pick in the NFL draft. And CJ West was a guy that a lot of schools wanted, because he was a spring guy last year, wasn't he? And he came out late and everybody wanted him.
Yeah, they beat LSU for him, and Brian Kelly cried about it. Yeah.
My God, I love when you bring up stuff like that. Thanks for being here, man. So Curt Cignetti made Brian Kelly cry. So like that's not just, hey, we found a diamond in the rough, but they also were willing to invest enough to make sure they get that guy. So I don't want it to make it sound like I'm completely giving up on Indiana, but I just got to tell, like, this is so rare. Like, this is an extreme of an extreme to have 19 first-year transfers. And you know what? We don't want to make a graphic and just like overwhelm people with all the numbers of this, but can I run through them quick? Can we just do them all real quick? Do you care if I do them real quick?
Please do. Yeah.
These were the new transfers who were among the top 30 in snaps for all the Northern teams last year. Okay, the ones that we already said, way on the high end. Indiana 19, Washington 14, Colorado 13, Michigan State 12, Cincinnati 12. Then it's a drop. Syracuse 8, new coach. West Virginia 8, Purdue 8, Pitt 7, Oregon 7, Notre Dame 6, Ohio State 5, Nebraska 5, Illinois 5, Wisconsin 5, Utah 4, Penn State 4, Michigan 4, Boston College 4, new coach Bill O'Brien, only 4 new transfers in the top 30, Maryland 4, Kansas State 3, Minnesota 3, BYU 3, Iowa State 2, Iowa 2, Rutgers 2, Kansas 2, Northwestern 1. And by the way, like Northwestern's going to have Preston Stone at quarterback in a way that's like really going to matter for them. So I think, and Northwestern's already getting a little more aggressive, but that like Bill, 19 out of 30 to 1 out of 30 new transfers. Such a crazy range, right?
That is a crazy range, but that's another thing where like I would have guessed that there were more teams in the double digits there. Like I'm surprised by that data. Like that's steep drop off once you got through what, like 6 or 7 teams to being in the single digits is fascinating to me, because I think like if you polled 100 college football fans and said like, hey, how many guys among a team's top 30 do you think are from the transfer portal? Like they might just say like the average in the sport is like 15 based off the way that the transfer portal is covered and the way we talk about it. So I'm sure those numbers will continue to change as like year over year as we're talking about. But for 2024, those are pretty crazy numbers.
So let's talk about one other team here that did not have a ton of high school guys, and I differentiate between this because I do think, how big of a difference do you think there is between getting a one-off guy? He's done everything he's going to do somewhere else. Dylan Gabriel, Will Howard, Riley Leonard, guys like that. Jordan Clark, slot cornerback for Notre Dame. Like it's a 1-year thing and you're out, versus a guy who can be a multi-year guy, because Oregon only had 15 of their 30 as high school guys, but they weren't a million on the new transfers. Oregon had 8 previous transfers, 7 new transfers, and 15 high school guys for the team last year. It was the only undefeated team during the regular season. So yes, they added guys like Jabbar Muhammad and Kobe Savage in the secondary and Evan Stewart as a new receiver who were new guys last year, but they also had Jordan Birch at the at edge as a previous transfer. They had
Tez Johnson from Troy as a previous transfer, right? Dylan Gabriel was a 1-year transfer last year. So I do think Oregon is interesting here. That Oregon, you would say, right? There's more than half your main guys, exactly half your main guys are not high school recruits. But they are getting in earlier on some guys and plucking them and getting them in, and then you're getting a transfer with development, which I'm curious whether you think Oregon living in a situation where half their roster is not out of high school, is that sustainable for them because of who they are and their NIL budget and the strategy that Dan Lanning has employed? Do they want to get away from that, or are they at a very perhaps unique but perfect balance for them of half high school guys? We're always going to work the portal to get multi-year guys, and then we'll add new guys when we need to. This Oregon strategy, what do you think of it? I think it's really well done. I don't know. I think the multi-year transfer was a shrewd strategy to bridge the gap between what Oregon was when Dan Lanning inherited it and what it is now, which is one of the premier high school recruiting outfits in the country. So I don't know that that's going to be their way of business necessarily moving forward. If you look at Oregon's last 2 recruiting classes, the 2025 class, it's freshmen right now, 5th in the country, but 1st overall in average player rating. The 2024 class this year, sophomores, 3rd in the country, 5th in overall player rating. Like that's elite recruiting. That's like Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama under Saban heyday, like kind of level of recruiting that I think gets you to the point where you don't have to take as many transfers as Oregon has taken the last couple of years. So I just think that they're like the poster child for like how to use it effectively as a bridge to something more. And I think like a couple of years from now, even Georgia's current recruiting class, like transfer class, it's not as big as it has been the last 2 years. It's good, but it's not. It's like 10 players, right? It's not 15 or 14 like it has been the last couple of seasons. So this is sort of like the blueprint, I think, for teams that want to operate at the elite level and chase national championships.
I think Oregon's looking at 7 new transfers, probably in the starting lineup this fall. That's Bear Alexander from USC at defensive tackle, and then Dylan Thieneman from Purdue and Taron Johnson from Northwestern in the secondary. 3/5 of their offensive line, Isaiah World and Alex Harvey at tackle, and Emmanuel Pregnon at USC was one of the best guards in the country last year. And then Mekhi Hughes from Tulane at running back. So that's strategic, right? But it's still kind of a lot. We'll get into like what I think is the perfect version of using the portal. That's still a little on the high end, but there's not any of those 7 guys that any team in the country would turn down. Like they have the ability to not just, and that's the thing. It's like, hey, they got a portal guy. It's like Oregon's going in and getting the best portal guys.
Yes, which helps. Counterbalance, I guess, like concerns that I've expressed in the past. Like we talked about this, I think, going into last season. The two positions where I would least like to remake every year via the portal are offensive line and secondary, and Oregon's kind of doing it for the second year in a row, which is part of the reason I think like you and I are maybe like slightly down compared to the rest of the people who talk about college football in Oregon. Not that I think they're going to stink, but like I don't know, there's like a walk-in to get to the playoff necessarily, but they do it at an elite level. But I would like to see Oregon recruit and develop offensive line and secondary more to kind of get off this cycle that they're on with having to remake those two position groups every year via the portal.
I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, the whole secondary last year was transfers. It's like
they were all different points, but they were all transfer. Yeah, all the starters were guys who transferred in. Yeah.
So okay, so now let's talk about the positions. So again, looking at these 172 out of the 860, 20% of the guys in the North who played were first-year transfers last year. At what positions did it happen? All right, this is my list. 27 at cornerback, 25 at receiver, 18 at safety, 18 at interior offensive line, guard and center, 17 at linebacker, 14 at offensive tackle, 12 at quarterback, 12 at defensive tackle, 11 at running back, 11 at edge, and 7 at tight end. So the thing that jumps out to me a little bit here, and there's not the same number of guys that play all these positions. So just, take this information and put it in your pocket. Everybody says this, right? Even with young players, the farther you are from the ball, the easier it is to come in and do something. So you tell a corner, cover that guy. You tell a receiver, get open, as opposed to the continuity and cohesiveness that we're constantly talking about on the offensive line that may come into play at the interior of a defense when you have linebackers trying to diagnose things. And if you've been in the defense for 3 years, that can really help you. It doesn't surprise me. The number that did stand out to me is so there's 56 starting offensive tackles in the North, right? 28 times 2. So 14 of them, of those 56, were first-year portal guys in a situation where it feels like everybody is looking for tackles all the time, as you said. So you can look, but there are not a million answers to be found at tackle, because I think if teams could do what they wanted to do, the number of tackles who are first-year transfer guys might be half. Now, the interesting thing here is Oregon's going to start 2 transfer tackles. Ohio State's going to start 2 transfer tackles, right? This can really matter. Penn State, for all the things, Penn State did not do a ton in the portal. One of the things that really helped them last year was they got Nolan Rucci in the portal from Wisconsin. So when Anthony Donko got hurt at right tackle, they plugged him in and he played awesome. And it really mattered for them. Tackle is not as high as I think teams would like it to be because they're hard to find.
They're hard to find. They're hard to develop. They're hard to evaluate. I think you should sign like 6 offensive tackles out of high school every year.
Yes.
Every year, and just like hope that 2 or 3 hit. And yes, you're inviting some attrition, but that's okay because it's an important position and it's a really hard one, difficult one to nail. So I'm not surprised by that number. I know, like, especially paying attention to Ohio State the last couple of years, like they've needed to go into the portal last couple of years for at least 1 tackle. And you look at some of the options that are out there and just like, I don't know, man. Like, and they got like the credit to Ohio State. They found Josh Simmons and he ended up being a very good player. It's unfortunate that he got hurt. And Oregon did it with a Johnny Cornelius getting in from Rhode Island. It's not to say that it's impossible, but there are not enough out there to feed all the tackle hungry teams, or the teams at least like think they're tackle hungry. I'm a little surprised about the discrepancy between the interior and the tackles, but I guess to your point, there's 3 interior guys and only 2 tackles. I was looking through last year, the All-Americans, like every offensive lineman who ended up being a first-team All-American, there were 15 of them across the various lists. Only one of them was a guy who transferred into his team last year, and it was Seth McLaughlin at Ohio State.
Okay. Interesting.
So like you don't have to be a first-team All-American for you to be considered a success as a transfer, clearly. But I think sometimes we talk about these guys when they come in as it's like, this guy's a slam dunk. He's going to be the best player in his position in the country. It's like, nope, I don't think that's true. And I think it's especially not true at offensive tackle.
But so I will say the thing that is worth, hey, audience, this we're trying to tell you, like, it's hard to sift through this stuff, Landis, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it is.
It's
Yeah.
a deluge of headlines, and there's a lot of stuff that just does not matter. Do not blow these off. The jump up tackles from Division II, from FCS, from Group of Five. And so this is why Joe Cotton at Cincinnati and Bryce George at Iowa just are interesting to me. It's not like Iowa's desperate for tackles. They have Jennings Dunker back at right tackle. They lost their left tackle, Mason Richmond, but they have a couple guys who are ready to step in there. But to add a guy like George, who is an injury insurance, I think is at the very least is going to be their swing tackle and may end up competing to be the starting left tackle. That can really matter. And they're so rare that it might be like, what's the big deal? Ferris State, South Dakota, who cares? You should really care. So if like a pedigreed tackle, because I think those guys have a chance, and we'll do the research on this summer. I think those guys, it makes sense to me that they would succeed. If you have a pedigreed tackle who has a bunch of starts at a lower level, was recognized as all conference or all something, and is ready to jump, I think that's a very wise investment for schools like Cincinnati and Iowa. And oh, by the way, like Ohio State starting left tackles coming from Rice, right? I mean, Ohio State's not getting their starting left tackle from Florida. They're getting it from Rice, but everyone thinks that guy's going to hit.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's, I would find comfort in that guy like being older, right? Like multiple years at that level, even if it's Division II, of being like an All-American caliber player. The times where I get worried is like when a 4-star guy who he hasn't played and he like transfers somewhere else to go be a starter. Everyone's like, look out, here he comes. It's like offensive line's hard. His head's going to be spinning the second he gets on the field, and you should lower your expectations. So I think I think the maturity and the experience that comes with some of these up transfers would at least it would be more desirable for me because it's a hard position to play when you're like kind of green like some of these guys are, who frankly get like big dollars because their recruiting pedigree was what it was coming out of high school, and good for them. But I think that's where people kind of get misled a little bit is just like how difficult offensive line is to play early on, especially when you're switching systems. It's like you're gonna have to show some patience. But it's hard when the move you made cost you so much money to do that.
The quarterbacks, last year we had 12 transfer quarterbacks who wound up being who made this list, right? Who wound up being the main guy for their team. We're looking at probably 9 for sure, and maybe another 2, and then we'll talk about one of the spots. But northern teams, our 28 northern teams that are probably going to start a new transfer at quarterback. Syracuse with Ricky Collins, although Steve Angeli is visiting there, but either would qualify. Caden Salter at Colorado, Devin Dampier at Utah, Billy Edwards at Wisconsin, Preston Stone at Northwestern, somebody at Purdue. I don't want to figure out how to count Ryan Brown, because Ryan Brown was at Purdue, left in December, was at North Carolina for the spring, and is transferring back to Purdue. We'll have to figure out if that counts. But Malachi Singleton's a transfer. Purdue could have one. Mark Gronowski at Iowa, Fernando Mendoza at Indiana, and Justin Martin, if he holds off the youngster Malik Washington and wins the job at Maryland. So that's 9. And the other 2 maybes, Dylan Lonergan from Alabama, if he beats out Grayson James at Boston College, and Mikey Keene, if he somehow winds up being the quarterback at Michigan, which we don't think is going to happen with Bryce Underwood there. But it feels like with our 28 teams, we should just expect like between 8 and 12 of the starting quarterbacks of those 28 every year are going to be new transfers that season.
Yeah, I think that's right. What made it higher last year is like Ohio State had one, right?
Yeah.
And they probably won't most years. We'll see about Oregon. We'll see about Notre Dame now, right? Like, so I think like those programs, Michigan, I guess, if Bryce Underwood starts something. So maybe that'll keep the number down. But I think, between like 8 to 10 or 11 makes sense.
Yeah. So, okay. So like, again, like we want to give you some information of the things that it's hard to figure out what matters. So we're trying to give you a little guide on what matters. So now we'll finish this up with like the 3 main strategies, I think, for working the portal. What are the teams that are trying to do different things? Who might change their strategy, and what works and what doesn't? We'll do that next on KOTN. Doug Lesmerises, back with Bill Landis on Kings of the North. If you want to send us a question, ask KOTN at gmail.com. ASKKOTN at gmail.com. You can give us a comment. You can tell us we're wonderful. You can tell us we're terrible. You can ask us things that you want us to include on the show, and we certainly welcome that. We've gotten some. We don't have a specific thing to ask you today, but we'll just take it whenever, and we'd like to work that into the show. All right, 3 strategies, Landis. Strategy 1 is just get better wherever you can. And it's not focusing on, hey, we have a huge hole at this spot, but it's just being aware for the opportunity to take guys who can make your team better. And I think the 2 teams that played for the national championship last year exemplified this.
Mm-hmm.
Notre Dame wound up with 6 new transfers last year and in their top 30, and Ohio State wound up, I believe, with 5. And yes, 6 and 5. And both of them were, I don't think, out of desperation. You look at a guy like RJ Oben from Duke, who just came in on the edge and worked in and was like quite important, made some big plays for Notre Dame. Yes, they wanted some help at receiver. They got Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell were among their top 30 guys last year, but Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison were their best receivers. Those guys didn't come in and set the world on fire, right? Obviously, Riley Leonard at quarterback, obviously Will Howard at quarterback for Ohio State, but Quinshon Judkins, they had Travion Henderson. They wanted to supplement that, take a little bit of a workload off Travion Henderson, but it's not like Ohio State said, well, we have no running backs. So right. It's easier. Ohio State and Notre Dame, just be like Ohio State and Notre Dame. But I think it's a way forward for anybody in that top tier of the sport. And I think Penn State, because Penn State's in a different category to me right now. I think Penn State has to be more aggressive with just generally being like, hey, where can we get better? And there's another team that I don't want to talk about, but I'm going to talk about because I thought this about them, then I got tricked. And I'm not sure what to think about them right now, but this is easier said than done. But I think it is what everybody at the top of the sport that wants to win a national title should be doing. And I do think it's still like Kansas State only added 3 guys last year. I just think Kansas State, with as good as they are, get a little more aggressive. Where can you get better? If you think you have a chance to make the playoff, I think you have to go into the portal, not thinking need, but thinking opportunity when you already are good. And I think there are some very good programs that absolutely have reasonable playoff hopes, Bill, who aren't quite there and thinking that way.
I think that's right. Penn State's an excellent example. I thought that we had the James Franklin show a couple weeks ago, and I thought, looking at Penn State compared to specifically teams like Ohio State and Notre Dame, that Penn State probably wasn't quite as aggressive. At certain positions, yes, it fills needs when it has to. But rarely does it seem to take that sort of, there's a better guy available than we have. Let's take a look at that kind of thing.
Yep.
Coaches do get caught up a little bit, I think, in the culture aspect of that. And I'm not even saying that's necessarily wrong, right? We have these guys in our program. We've developed them. We don't want to hurt feelings. I think, it's a delicate balance, but maybe you have to get over the feelings a little bit or trust your ability to navigate it, which I think Ohio State did incredibly well last year. Notre Dame did incredibly well last year. So maybe in doing that, they have perhaps made a more comfortable endeavor for other teams to try to do the same thing. I'm not saying it's easy, but I do think if you're in the pool of teams that is consistently expected to strive for championships, you need to be living this life. And even if you're the teams like a Kansas State that maybe you feel like you're in a little bit of a window, but maybe you have an opportunity to upgrade here or there to really push yourself, deeper into that conversation, and you can afford it, you should do it too. I think we should be past the point of I don't know if this is going to upset the locker room. Of course, if the guy's a jerk, and he's a jerk, maybe don't bring him into your team. But if it's a really good player who you have a shot to get, you should not let feelings get in the way of you upgrading your team. In a world where players are now getting paid and this is big business.
Michigan did this very well in the offensive line a couple of years ago. They just brought in a bunch of dudes and were like, hey, they got to a point where they probably had 7 or 8 starting quality offensive linemen. And okay, too bad. We have too many good players. They got Ernest Hausman at linebacker from Nebraska 2 years ago. And then last year they added Jayshon Barham, a former 5-star recruit from Maryland, at linebacker. And I don't know. It's not like you're looking around at Michigan and be like, oh man, Michigan needs to plug holes in its defense. But hey, guess what? Let's add some good players. So I do think I'm putting this on non-ironically. I don't like wearing the dog hat unironically.
Yeah.
But it's going to turn ironic in the midst of this. So I did do a couple non-North teams because, as you know, Bill, I don't care. Georgia last year, their top 30. Are you ready for this? Are you ready for this? Are you ready for this? Guess how many of their top 30 from last year, the mighty Georgia Bulldogs, were high school guys?
20?
28.
Wow.
And everyone made a huge deal about them adding Trevor Etienne at running back last year from Florida.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one. He was the one new transfer who was in their top 30. And then they had Dominic Lovett, who had transferred the year before from Missouri at receiver. That's it. So they need to do more. They need to get this message. And we have a Georgia fan who's very fun to interact with, who I'm sure is watching this show or listening to this show right now. They got the Branch brothers from USC. Zachariah and Zion, one's going to help him at receiver and returner, one's going to help him in the secondary. But then on Easter, they got 3 portal guys on Easter. And I was like, here we go. Unironic, Kirby learning, Kirby acknowledging they've got to be more aggressive and more targeted with, of course, Georgia has a ton of talent, but where can they get better? And then I looked at who they added and I was reminded, like, all this stuff is crap. These headlines, sometimes they got a guy, a defensive tackle from Miami, who was like a borderline 3 or 4-star recruit when he went to Miami. He's been there 2 years. He's played 62 snaps in 2 years, and he gets a headline because he went to Georgia in the portal. Who cares? They got a guy from Army, an edge guy from Army, Elo Madozi. I'm sure he's wonderful. Last year, among edge rushers in the American Athletic Conference, he had the 13th best PFF grade. Maybe he's going to take over for Jalen Walker and Michael Williams and set the SEC on fire. Maybe not. And then they added Josh McCray from Illinois to be part of probably a 2-headed monster at tailback for them, because they always do that. And Josh McCray is a very solid player for Illinois. But Illinois has 3 other running backs. And it was news when McCray won in the portal out of Illinois. But Brett Bielema said, like, and of course coaches said this, because like, we're not that surprised. And they have plenty of running back depth. I don't think it hurts Illinois that much. And if this is the world we're in, where Illinois loses a running back and they're like, we're fine. And Georgia's like, oh yeah, boom shakalaka. Check this out. Josh McCray averaged 4.1 yards per carry last year, 638. I don't know what his actual stats are. I'm guessing. That's a good world for the North. So I was ready to come in and unironically wear the hat and be like, Kirby Smart's figured it out. And then I figured out that the 3 guys who were Easter headlines for them are kind of mid.
Yeah, that's the hard part with this. It's like, all you have to go off of is what coaches care to tell the people who are covering the transfer portal for a lot of these guys. So like the guy from Army, like people, this guy's a diamond in the rough kind of deal. Like, wait till he gets on the power level and he'll be a good player. And maybe if he like committed to Syracuse, we talk about him differently. I don't know, but if you don't have proven production, if you're not a 5-star like David Stone, who left Oklahoma, was going to leave Oklahoma and then went back to Oklahoma, like a 5-star who's only going into year 2, or then like I don't care. Like I like the guy from Miami is like a mid-tier 4-star prospect out of high school, hasn't done anything at the college level yet. It's like maybe it'll be great.
62
but
snaps.
Don't tell me they got Warren Sapp because he went from Miami to Georgia. You know what I mean? Like So it's a little hard to sift through like what's real and what's not with this portal stuff.
And I don't mean to have a player who played in the North and talk nice about him, and then he goes to the South and then dismiss him. Wait, actually, that's exactly what I mean. So anyway,
Sure.
good luck to Josh McCray, but like we don't cover you anymore.
That's right.
But also Illinois had like 3 different guys who had 90 carries last year, and he was one of them. And his yards per carry is pretty good. I don't want to give him short shrift, 5.2, but Aiden Lockery was 6.1, and he's back. So whatever.
And Fagan's big. He's like a bus.
And Caden Fagan, I was making Derrick Henry comparisons for Caden Fagan in week 2. What are we talking about? He was running through Kansas, and I was like, Derrick Henry has come to Champaign. And then it was like he ran for 300 yards or whatever you're going to do. But anyway, that's how it works out sometimes. 306 yards, 4.6 yards. But like I think they'll be fine. Okay. So that's like just go get better and be very targeted. And Ohio State and Notre Dame, I think, set the examples. And by the way, let's do this quick in here, Bill. Mike, the graphic of the playoff teams, just to have this down, our northern playoff teams, just again to reemphasize there are different ways to do this. I didn't include Boise State because they're a G5 team. North playoff teams last year, their top 30. How many of the top 30 were high school players, new transfers, previous transfers, right? So like that's what we're talking about here. And Notre Dame was 24 high school players and 6 new transfers. So that I think is like a replicable model for Notre Dame. And I kind of think they should keep following that. And that would be a good plan. Typo by me, Ohio State was 23 high school players, 5 new transfers, 2 previous transfers. Again, I think replicable. Penn State, 26 high school players, 4 new transfers, no previous transfers. Oregon, 15 high school players, 7 new transfers, 8 previous transfers. Indiana, 8 high school players, 19 new transfers, 3 previous transfers. What we're talking about here, Landis, is 3 completely different approaches. Indiana, reshape it in the offseason. Oregon, lean into the portal all the time. And then Notre Dame and Ohio State be pretty strategic. And Penn State probably not do it enough. But they all made the playoffs. So anyway, we're not saying there's a right answer here, but we just want everyone to be able to sort of maximize their potential.
Yeah, I don't think there's a right answer. Well, I think there's a right answer for like long-term sustainability, I guess I would say. But I don't think there's a wrong answer if you're looking for that occasional spark like Indiana.
Yes. Okay. So the first thing was get better wherever you can. The second one is target your weakness. And I think there are a couple specific teams that really hit this. For all the things we're talking about with Penn State, what Penn State did last year is they went and got 2 starting cornerbacks from the SEC in Jalen Kimber out of Florida and A.J. Harris out of Georgia. High expectations for them, absolutely lived up to it. And I'm not sure they get as far as they did to the Final Four without those 2 guys. So I think there is a lesson learned there. And this is interesting as they add Devontae Ross and Kyron Hudson at receiver this year. They also added Julian Fleming at receiver last year from Ohio State. That was fine, but it didn't hit the same way that Kimber and Harris hit. But I'm not worried about Penn State, but like that Penn State, it feels like, okay, they're trying to really be aware of maybe those skill guys, those fast twitch guys on the outside on both sides of the ball. The portal's just going to be a better spot for us. And Trevor Pena, the Syracuse slot receiver, is visiting Penn State on Friday. There's been, I think, a lot of other chatter. I think Miami's been mentioned as a team possibly for him. If Penn State can get him, I'm thinking like KJ Hamler kind of stuff, Bill, of what a really big play, exciting, reliable, borderline 1,000-yard slot receiver looks like for Penn State. Pena would be a huge deal. But I don't think Penn State should be in a situation where they're only thinking receiver and corner because of shortfalls. I think they need to be just supplementing generally. And James Franklin, again, talking about old school coaches, when they won their first playoff game last year and he reached 100 wins for his career at Penn State. I was at that post-game news conference. I was at that game, and he was talking a lot and taking a lot of pride in our guys have been here. Abdul Carter's been here. Tyler Warren's been here. Drew Aller's been here, right? That they built it the old school way. And I think there is a very fine line between doing that, but then making it seem like supplementing is somehow a weakness, or that you take pride in the fact that you don't supplement we target weaknesses, but otherwise we have everything we need. I just think you have to be careful there, man. But they did a great job targeting weaknesses, but they need to do more.
I think they need to do more, but you might also, if you present it to the James Franklin, he might say that maybe they did that at corner. Penn State recruits and develops corner pretty well, and maybe if they didn't take 2 starters like they did with Jalen Kimber and AJ Harris, they probably could have been okay, but they took 2 starters anyway. Yes, they can be slight. I think they can have a more aggressive slant, but I don't. Maybe it's not a total lack of aggression, I guess I would say.
Okay. I mean, I think it was a step even for them to get the corners last year. That was progress.
Yeah. I think that's right. But they also could have maybe done more. I don't even know where offensive skill, I guess, right? I don't know if people looked at Penn State's defense and thought to yourself, like, boy, they're good here, but they could be better aside from corner. And they did attack that position. So, but even like this offseason, they're not. I don't know that Penn State's taking transfers where I thought to myself, like Ohio State took Max Clare, right, the tight end from Purdue, and they just took him because he's really good. Like, I don't think they needed him, but he's really good and they wanted to go to Ohio State. And I don't think Penn State's taking anybody that falls into that category under James Franklin.
So therefore, and then I already mentioned Rucci. Rucci's the perfect example of that. They didn't need offensive line help, but imagine if Anthony Donko gets hurt and they don't have Nolan Rucci with his experience and his pedigree at Wisconsin ready to slide in at right tackle. They might not have gone as far as they did, right? But they did add him. And so I think they just need to do more of that. Incredible credit for Harris and Kimber, but I think they need a little more Rucci. So I think there's room for them to grow there. I thought Illinois at tackle last year with J.C. Davis at left tackle and Melvin Priestley at right tackle. J.C. Davis from New Mexico, Melvin Priestley from Grambling. Story like the portal opens, Brett Bielema is in New Mexico having breakfast with J.C. Davis, absolutely targets it. We're talking about only 14 Northern tackles out of the portal. Illinois had 2. Like, great targeting. Now, they also got Zachary Franklin at receiver in the spring portal last year. Like, he was a super veteran guy, talented guy, really helped them behind Pat Bryant. Did they need another receiver? They had Pat Bryant, but he helped them. I do think, and listen, Luke Altmaier a couple years ago as a transfer. I think Illinois is in a really good spot, but I think their tackles are an example of really targeting it. And I just think there's even still a little bit more room for Illinois to grow. But for instance, they added a bunch of Wisconsin guys on the defensive line. I think Bielema has a pretty good handle on this.
I think he has a good handle on how they need to build it and like where they need to go to find it. Right. Because those are two separate parts of that conversation. Like, I think there are a lot of teams would love to add transfers and high impact transfers. Do you know where to go to find them? Do you trust your evaluations? Can you afford them? Do you have a good handle on like sort of your pool to address those needs? And it does seem like Illinois, like, I'm not like, Illinois they're not shopping in the same aisle as Ohio State and Notre Dame and Oregon and Georgia, but I think where they are shopping, they do a pretty good job of it.
Yeah. Iowa State this year brought in 2 receivers from the portal to replace Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. Again, it's so specific and targeted. I just think they need to be a little more aggressive across the board. And I'm very curious to see how this works out. And they needed to do it because I don't think they've developed quite the receivers behind those 2 superstars. But again, we already kind of covered Iowa State. I just think they're a little old school and need to try to get after a little bit more when they can. The last category is reshaping your roster. And all I would say about this is don't get tricked. I got tricked last year because Purdue brought in a bunch of transfers. And I thought I could go through, and a couple of them were former Georgia backups, right? And I thought I could go through and feel like, that guy will help here, and that guy will help here. Reggie Love, running back from Illinois, that guy will help here. And it was too much. And it was more from desperation of we're not good enough and we need to add a bunch of guys. And I might have been the only person tricked by Purdue last year because everybody else was like, they're going to be terrible. And I was like, no, they're not. And then they were terrible, and their coach got fired. Texas Tech is all over the news for what they've done in the transfer portal, #1 ranked transfer portal class. I'm gonna be cautious about the reshapes. And the other school that I did a little work on, non-North. So Bill, remember I said Georgia was 28 high school guys. Last year, Ole Miss their top 30 players, guess how many were high school guys they recruited that only ever played at Ole Miss out of 30?
4.
6.
Okay.
So that is fewer than anybody in the North, because our lowest number was Colorado with 7. So Ole Miss, they had 6 high school guys, they had 10 previous transfers, and they had 14 new transfers from last year with that transfer portal class that everybody was talking about. Walter Nolan comes from Texas A&M, plays well for Ole Miss, is going to be a borderline first round pick in the NFL draft this week. But they didn't get where they wanted to go. And I think if you look at the games, and I don't watch Ole Miss enough to know, I just watch the scoreboard, and when they lose, I make fun of them.
Mm-hmm.
But if Ole Miss lost, like in the Fermo rankings from last year, they're like 7th. They didn't make the playoff. They had 3 losses. They had more talent than their record reflected. So that makes me ask why. And is it partly because they had a bunch of new guys that never played together before, and they tried to build a championship team out of that? And so the only 2 Northern teams who would compare to Ole Miss last year are Indiana, which is a very specific Cignetti exception, and Colorado. And I am taking Colorado as Deion's gonna Deion. And he has a strategy. And also, Deion Sanders does not have an edict to get Colorado to the playoff. Their 9-win season last year was awesome. Ole Miss won 9 games in the regular season. I don't think anybody was like, awesome year for Ole Miss. I would just say be on alert. I am not going to get overly enamored with Texas Tech, and I am not going to get overly enamored with Ole Miss. And I don't think that like Ole Miss is winning the portal if you got a bunch of highly ranked transfers who led you to a season where you lost 2 games you never should have lost.
The problem is with how it's talked about, because I would say like Ole Miss won the portal because Lane Kiffin keeps winning 9 and 10 games, and that's really hard to do at Ole Miss. But he's not making the playoff. So if we talk about it the right way, it'd be less annoying. But we don't do that.
No,
the difference with Texas Tech,
actually, like Ole Miss and Colorado, maybe are not so dissimilar in with what they've been.
Correct.
High-profile, exciting coaches, but nobody at Colorado is talking about them as a playoff team, and we got nothing but that all year from the SEC honks.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the difference maybe with Texas Tech is winning 10 games might be enough, right, to get you to playoff, because it's a different league, different set of circumstances, I think, than Ole Miss. So like I'm not entirely buying the Texas Tech hype train. Like I get it, like they're loading up, good for them. They got an oil baron who's with deep pockets who wants to see them be better. They did not have a ton of like championship history at Texas Tech, so this is their way of trying to strive for something greater. Like good for Texas Tech, but it is easier, I think, to move up a little bit in the world in the Big 12 than it is in the SEC. So like the issue with Ole Miss is like it's not that they're like I don't know, claiming to be one thing and then actually ended up being another. It's that people are like putting undue expectations on them. Like actually they have been very good. They've done a nice job with their roster build. It's just not what the people who puff up the SEC all the time would lead you to believe. But like I can respect a team that wins 9 and 10 games a lot, because I know that it's hard to do.
All right, that's our big takeaways. I hope we've provided a little context that maybe you're not getting elsewhere. Did we? You think we did? Did we?
Yeah.
It's a lot of numbers. Let's run through a couple things that are happening with the folks. Just what's happening in the Northern Portal real quick. We talked about Josh McCray, Illinois running back, going to Georgia. Steve Angeli visiting Syracuse. How intrigued are you by this idea? Again, the veteran Notre Dame quarterback. Fran Brown had named Ricky Collins, the LSU transfer, who's never really played, as the starter, but that's because Steve Angeli wasn't there. Steve Angeli feels like Kyle McCord light in a very potentially interesting way.
I would like it. I think Angeli's got something to him. He's got more experience than Ricky Collins. Even if you want to bet on the long-term upside of Ricky Collins, I guess it's like he's in his 3rd year, so how long-term is it? But like he's not played at all. I'd rather have a guy who's played, and like he played in the playoff. So it's interesting. It feels like part of the reason Trevor Pena left Syracuse is because he was uncertain about the quarterback play in the offense. I'm like, well, what if you got Steve Angeli as your quarterback? Would that like make you want to stay? So it's very interesting. Syracuse is not the only team in there for Angeli, but it seems like from some of the reporting that's like if Angeli goes to Syracuse, like he's probably going to or visit Syracuse, probably going to end up going there. And then I guess you have a competition between he and Ricky Collins that I would expect Angeli to win if that were to happen.
And then if that's now you're talking about a situation where you have a veteran guy, Collins gets one more year in the system. I don't know that means, I mean, maybe it does. I don't know what that would mean for Ricky Collins, but that doesn't seem like a terrible outcome for Syracuse of like, okay, we still like Ricky Collins. We just aren't going to be all or nothing with him this year, which is where they are right now. The idea that Fran Brown has named Ricky Collins a starter is like, well, who else is it going to be? Because even I think the young backup from last year left.
He left.
So there's nobody else.
I think that's the path. Like a year of Angeli, a year of Collins learning the offense, and then I think you get 2 years out of Collins. Like that's how you get off the transfer carousel. And then you bring in a high school guy behind Collins, let him develop. Like I would very much be in favor of that plan, but I also understand players are impatient. So maybe if Steve Angeli commits to Syracuse, Ricky Collins will leave.
Syracuse also, again, the Trevor Pena thing is difficult, but they also lost All-American defensive lineman Murad Watson, who apparently now has a million offers from huge big-time teams. This is one of those where I don't want to call it it is what it is, but it's so difficult for a program like Syracuse. I don't think they did anything wrong here, but you play a guy, he's credit to Watson. He's really good as a first-year player, and the result is he realizes he can go get paid by big-time programs, and he's out the door when in the past he probably would have been a 3-year starter at Syracuse and maybe an All-American candidate by his 3rd year. So it's just the way of the world now, right?
It is the way of the world. I don't think this would be the case, but I would hope it. Like Murad Watson was a 3-star prospect. Like he was ranked in the thousands. He was a good high school football player from New Jersey. Who want this, like, it was a great find by the staff, want the Syracuse, got developed well enough to now probably going to go to like Ohio State or Georgia. Like Fran Brown can sell that. And I don't think Fran Brown will have any problem selling that. So like it sucks, but you can spin a negative into a positive, I think, if you're Syracuse in this situation.
Yeah. You're very smart about that. You said the same thing like with Phillip Daniels going from Minnesota to Ohio State, that becomes a situation that, hey, you can come to our program because we're going to set you up for success, whether that means success with us or success somewhere else because we've created the opportunity for you. So it's not all downside. We talked about Joe Cotton signing at Cincinnati. I had thought Micah Hudson could be an interesting guy in the transfer portal, 5-star receiver, but he actually has gone back to Texas A&M. He was at Texas Tech. Now he's back to Texas A&M. And I guess Utah
You went back to Texas A&M or Texas Tech?
Right. I don't want to have to know these things. Former Texas Tech will transfer to Texas A&M. So I think
he was. He was at Tech, right? He was at Tech and then went to A&M and then is going to go back to Tech, I think is the...
I don't care.
Yeah.
Is he going to Utah? Is he going to Utah?
Probably. He's visiting Utah. He's supposed to visit Utah.
Is he still supposed to visit? That's what I had. Visit Utah.
Yeah.
I do not. Ryan Brown's doing the same thing. We joked about it. Like, is all that perfectly fine? Caden Proctor did it, Alabama to Iowa for the spring, back to Alabama. Is that just a perfectly acceptable thing for a college player who has the ultimate freedom to do? Or is that something that is ridiculous and probably there should be a rule against it?
I think it's a little ridiculous and there should be a rule. Yeah. Like I'm very much in favor of player empowerment. Sometimes it gets a little silly and this is one of those instances. Yeah.
So Ryan Brown might be the starting quarterback back at Purdue. Bo Atkinson, North Carolina, looking at Ohio State. Keelan Marion, who when we did like our little BYU nugget when they ended spring ball before anybody, and I was like, Keelan Marion is going to be their number 2 receiver. They lost Darius Lassiter, but he was a great return man last year, was their 3rd reading receiver. He's ready for a step up. And he was like, yeah, I'm ready for a step up. And I think like Texas has been mentioned with him, but then I saw him mentioned with Texas, like, oh, Texas needs a return guy. And it's like, no, he would have had 800 receiving yards at BYU for a BYU team that I think will be in the thick of the playoff hunt. And like, this is just, is it okay to be disappointed? Like I'm disappointed. And then By Job is a guy, one of the edge guys who's a former Michigan State guy who went to Kansas, was one of my 10 guys to watch this spring. He's transferring out of Kansas. Like, is it okay to be disappointed?
I think it's okay to be disappointed by Keelan Marion. It doesn't seem like by Joe has not done a whole lot, and I don't think was going to start for Kansas.
Yeah.
Seems like from the reporting out of Kansas, like he was still like fighting to be. I think he left because he didn't think he was going to play.
Yeah.
Marion's different. I also saw like I think it was Hayes Fossa put out like these 9,000 schools are the schools that have contacted Keelan Marion, and one of them was Ohio State. It's like, well, he's not going to Ohio State to play receiver.
Yeah.
He would go and be a kick returner like that. I don't know. Like if you want to go to a place like that and be a kick returner and make $700,000, who am I to begrudge you? But
yeah,
I think he very well could be going to a situation where he's going to get the ball less than he would have gotten at BYU.
Yeah. Colorado signed Campbell receiver Sincere Brown, who was a 1,000-yard receiver last year. It feels like just Colorado's got a thing like that. They're going to get receivers. That
they got an enticing offense there, I think. Yeah. Brown's interesting. 6'5", big dude, like contested catch kind of guy. That'll be fun.
Hakeem Williams, who I think Pitt was involved with coming out of high school. If they can land him, that would be very helpful. Florida State transfer. Again, he's visiting Pitt today on Monday. And then the last thing I want to talk about is this, best of luck to this kid, but this Jaden Rashada thing is just, I don't even know that it's a warning, but he was the kid who signed at Florida. There was an NIL mess, right, where he felt like maybe he was promised things that weren't delivered. Yeah. So they let him out of his letter. He went to Arizona State. Then he transferred from Arizona State to Georgia. Now he's in the portal again and apparently looking at UConn and Fresno State. So that's just too much movement for a guy, I think, right? You hope he still makes it, but there are some cautionary tales of ultimate freedom to be hooked up with 4 different schools in 2 years. You have the freedom to do that, but man, are we setting up some of these guys for failure with a complete lack of structure, right? I mean, I don't want to say other people know what's better for you, but man, Jaden Rashada was like a big time recruit, and it feels like he's lost right now.
Yeah, I guess like I think you're right. I think I worry about that. It depends on maybe the situation you're in, right? But if you're at least out of high school, it seems like, well, Jaden Rashada's got a potential NFL future, right? And it's like, well, you got to get your feet under you somewhere for you to have a chance at that happening. I think like even like Bear Alexander at Oregon is an example of that. It's like incredibly like a ton of talent. He's on like his 8th school in 7 years, going back to high school. It's tough. You don't know everyone's like personal situation and why they might be moving around, but the lack of guidance, I do think can hurt guys at times. Clearly. Yeah. So, will structure be the answer to that? I don't know. Maybe not. But sometimes you do get a little worried about like, maybe you're not getting pointed in exactly the right direction by people who are influencing you. Yeah.
Really hard. We're not where we need to be. But so your main takeaway from this is that the portal in general does not have quite the impact on rosters and teams that maybe you thought in your head.
I think for power conference teams, the portal maybe is mostly there to be your friend. Like, I think we understand the nature of the beast for G5 teams and maybe even a couple of lower level Power 4 teams where it's just really hard to keep your roster together. And I do, in some respects, like feel for the people who are trying to keep those rosters together. But if you are on the other side of that coin, it seems like there's more opportunity there for you to better yourself than not if you play it right. So yeah, and I think like for the teams that are showing a little bit of an uptick in their transfer additions this offseason, it seems like they're starting to figure that out.
Yeah. Okay. And again, just this, I still just am intrigued. I mean, we're talking about even again to talk about the Southern teams that Georgia was 28 out of 30 high school guys and Ole Miss was 6 is fascinating to me. So we do our outliers here for working the portal are Indiana and Colorado. And I think people knew that, but now we have some numbers to associate with that. We'll see where Oregon goes with this. And then we'll see on the other end, do some of those other schools, Rutgers, Iowa State, Utah, do they get a little more aggressive? So there is that, I think at the middle, right? I said I was going to, my conclusion is there's not a certain number, but if you can have 20 to 25 of your guys be people you recruited and developed out of high school and then be open and targeted, not only targeted and not only open and, oh yeah, that guy will help us, but if you can somehow strike that balance, but retain a base. I think that helps your culture. I think it helps your the intelligence of your team. You even think, Bill, it's hard because I think Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith, who were new Buckeyes last year, were two of the guys involved in the meeting. But the famous meeting Ohio State had after the Michigan loss that Monday night, they had a team meeting. I just don't know if Ole Miss could have had a team meeting like that.
Right.
When there's only 6 of their 30 guys who play who have any standing in the program as having coming up. They came up through this, And so I don't want to be old fashioned about that, but I think there's something to that, right?
I think there is. Yeah. That's actually a really good example. But that's why, I'm sure maybe James Franklin wouldn't want to use the specific Ohio State example, but I think he would say the same thing about maybe why he's not been more aggressive. But I think, I think you can always be cognizant of that and have it in the back of your mind and make sure you're doing everything to make sure that sort of element of your team is as strong as it needs to be, while keeping an eye on potential upgrades. We're not sitting here saying James Franklin go add 13 transfers for the sake of doing so. But if you're adding 6 and there's a 7th or an 8th, they're maybe we don't necessarily need that guy, but he would definitely be better than what we have. Championship teams make that move, right? So
I agree.
And I think that's the world that they need to be living in more often than that.
All right, that'll do it for this version of Kings of the North. If you want to if you want to subscribe, if you want to tell a friend, if you want to send a question or comment to askkotn@gmail.com. We certainly welcome that. Without this audience, without you guys watching and listening, this is nothing. This is literally nothing. So we never take you for granted. We're always grateful that you guys are here. We have I want to at least touch on the NFL draft on Wednesday because by my constant, I am living in mock drafts, but I am not living in mock drafts because I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if the Jaguars are going to take Ashton Genty or Mason Graham at 5, although they're both Northern guys. I am doing one thing in every mock draft, and I'm pretty sure I am the only person in the country doing it the way that I do it. And I will just tell you, the thing that I am doing is very interesting and very encouraging for Northern football. So I want to share that with you. And so I want on Wednesday, Bill, I want to create, at least for part of the show, I want to help people watch the draft on Thursday and Friday with a certain eye toward things. Because what I literally want people in the second round, if Donovan Ezeraku for Boston College sneaks into the first round, I want Northern fans to be yes, because you're counting. And when Northern guys go, number 53 was a Northern guy, I want you to pump your fist. So we're going to lay it out and explain why this could be an awesome NFL draft for the North. Because why, Bill? Because the North runs college football. Thanks as always to our
second year in a row too. The draft is in the North, right?
No, in the NFL, nobody in the NFL is oh man, the South is where it's at. It's everything in the NFL is about Carolina and Atlanta. That's the heartbeat of the NFL. It's no, it's not. Guess what? It's in New England and Pittsburgh and Green Bay and places where it snows sometimes. So get used to it now. Thanks to our producer, Mike Yorstowski, for making us look good and sound good. Thanks to you guys for being here. We will see you Wednesday live on YouTube at noon, or listening and watching back whenever you can get to us. For now, he's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.